I have written another article for New Eastern Outlook. It is titled, Washington's War on Iran, the Importance of Defending Information Space. I have also written another article for Beijing Review about how the US war on Iran is part of the wider war on multipolarism. I will get into that in the next video. But for now, let's focus on the importance of defending information space. This is an issue that every single nation on Earth needs to address. And so many nations, I would say most nations, are not taking this seriously. Your information space is as important to defend and to control as your airspace, your land borders, and your shores. And if you're not controlling your information space, then you might as well not be controlling your country at all, because the information space is what shapes the minds of the people in your country. And if you have been cut out of access to your own citizenry by the United States and US-based social media platforms that work with the US government and with the special interests that determine US government foreign and domestic policy, then you have no control over your country at all. It doesn't matter how big your army is. If the US can convince your population to turn against itself and have the whole country collectively walk over a cliff, it doesn't matter how big your army is, how good your police are, you cannot control what the people think, say, or do, because the US is controlling it instead. So let's get into this. The US has demonstrably continued its war on Iran through the execution of long-laid plans aimed at destabilizing the nation through US-backed protests and armed terrorists targeting major cities over the course of several days. And I have been following the footage coming out of Iran. These are armed terrorists. They have war weapons. They are working together. They have been trained, and they have been fully equipped by somebody. Who is that somebody? It is the United States. And in their own policy papers, and I will show you those policy papers, they admit that this is what they were going to do and how, and now we see it unfolding before our own eyes. This follows a nearly 2-week-long war the US and its Israeli proxies launched against Iran in mid-2025. Do you remember that? It was back in June last year, only having been placed on pause ahead of the next round of destabilization and military aggression, which appears to be unfolding right now. And even though the Iranian government appears to have gotten on top of the protests, and we will talk about how they did that, the US is still moving military forces into the region. They're moving military forces out of specific bases close to Iran, within range of Iran's ballistic missiles. So they are still going ahead with this. The only thing that is going to stop the US from attacking Iran, and only temporarily, will be Iran and its allies creating sufficient deterrence against a US attack. But the US will continue planning attacks, and it will continue preparing the ground to give themselves the advantage in any sort of attack, and open up the opportunity for an attack. So they are constantly searching for a way to attack Iran, and Iran is constantly searching, together with its allies, for ways to deter this. So it will be a constant process. The only way it will end is if Iran somehow establishes an irreversible form of deterrence that the US simply cannot overcome, like Russia and China's nuclear arsenal, for example, or until the US succeeds and overthrows Iran. Amid the US organized unrest in January 2026, the US has openly backed the opposition, calling for armed militants to continue their operations and to even seize government institutions. Could you imagine if there were protests in the United States, Russia or China or Iran officially told the protesters to take up arms and take over public institutions? Could you imagine how that would be interpreted and perceived by the US government, by the US corporate media, whichever mouthpiece it happens to be, conservative or so-called liberal. Associated Press, right here, this article right here. Trump calls on Tehran to show protesters humanity amid reports of rising death toll in crackdown. And this is as President Trump defends US, not even police, ICE agents, killing American citizens for protesting their politically motivated, performative roundup of immigrants. In this article, they quote President Trump as saying, "Keep protesting and take over your institutions if you can, and that help is on the way," in reference to previous threats of US military strikes on Iran and support of the opposition. As Alex Christoforou and Alexander Mercouris in their daily reports have pointed out, this is an open admission that this has nothing to do with a nuclear arms program. This was always about regime change. This is what I tried to impress upon people. It was always about regime change. The US seeks regime change in Iran since the late 1970s, since the Iranians rightfully kicked the Anglo-Americans out of their own country. They have sought to overthrow the Iranian political order and seize the country and its natural resources back, just like President Trump presided over the takeover of Venezuela just this month. Beyond the rhetorical support, evidence of direct US involvement began to surface amid the Western media's own reports. There's this BBC article right here. There wasn't even time for CPR. Iran medics describe hospitals overwhelmed with dead and injured protesters. Are they medics that were contacting the BBC? Because in the BBC article, and I will go over this in the article, they say that these people in Iran are contacting the BBC via Starlink. Starlink terminals, as I will point out, were organized, shipped to opposition inside Iran, not to medics, not to ordinary people in Iran just going about their daily business. They were sent specifically to the opposition. So it is the opposition contacting the BBC and the BBC uncritically repeating whatever it is that they said. If the BBC even went through that much trouble and isn't fabricating everything entirely. The BBC in a recent article admitted, buried deep in its report, that security forces have also been killed, implying heavily armed elements amid the so-called protests. The same article admitted that informants contacting the BBC from within Iran were using Starlink satellite connections, referring to US-based SpaceX's satellite communication network. And of course, SpaceX, founded by Elon Musk openly promoting regime change, neoconservative, corporate fascist regime change all around the globe. He is just shamelessly promoting it, and he is participating in it with the capabilities that his companies have, and specifically SpaceX and Starlink. This comes as no surprise. I remember reporting on this all the way back in 2022. CNN exclusive: after Ukraine, Biden administration turns to Musk's satellite internet for Iran. I've actually seen people try to seriously suggest that this recent episode of unrest in Iran was planned between Benjamin Netanyahu and Donald Trump back in December, as if you could organize all of this, ship thousands of Starlink terminals to Iran, train everyone up on it, get all the weapons and ammunition in place in less than a month. Somehow all of that was put together in just a month and then executed. No, and this article proves it. It started years ago. It began under the Biden administration, and it continued uninterrupted under the Trump administration, like absolutely everything else, like the continued US proxy war against Russia in Ukraine, like the continued encirclement and attempted containment of China in the Asia Pacific, like regime change in Venezuela. It is a singular foreign policy. Republican or Democratic Party, does not matter. It continues. Yes, the lies change. The face is telling you the lies change. But it is the same policy. It continues no matter who you vote for, no matter who is in the White House, and no matter who is in Congress. So as early as 2022, CNN reported that the White House has engaged in talks with Elon Musk about the possibility of setting up SpaceX satellite internet service, Starlink, inside Iran, as one of several ways to support the Iranian protest movement. More recently, this Forbes article, kill switch, Iran shuts down Musk's Starlink for first time. This Forbes article admitted tens of thousands of Starlink units are operating inside Iran, a metric of how aggressively the Biden administration era initiative was executed and then continued under the subsequent Trump administration. So President Trump picked up whatever was going on under the Biden administration. Yes, publicly he condemns President Biden, his administration, all of their policies. He presents himself as the exact opposite, but he took literally every single policy and continued it. Beyond continuity of agenda between the supposedly opposing presidential administrations, plans to back violent unrest inside Iran have been laid out by U.S. policymakers as early as 2009 in the Brookings Institution paper, Which Path to Persia, and seamlessly carried out by each successive administration, regardless of political affiliation or campaign rhetoric. That is this policy paper right here. The link will be in the video description below. I have people asking me constantly, where can I find these policy papers that you cover? If you go to my videos here on the new Atlas, and you see this little description here, and it says more, you click on more, and all of the links that I reference in the video will be in the video description below. And you just click on these links and it will bring you to the policy papers or the news articles that I am citing in my videos. So getting back to Which Path to Persia, this was published in 2009. And this isn't the first time these ideas were ever considered. This is simply a snapshot of where US policy towards overthrowing Iran was back in 2009. And they had all of the options that they had already been working on for years, I would say even decades, since the 1970s. 1979 onward. And if you look at the options, diplomatic options, an offer Iran shouldn't refuse, persuasion, and they admit in the paper, and I've gone over this many times, they admit in the paper that this isn't actually about trying to arrive at a diplomatic solution. It's about pretending that the US tried diplomacy before shifting toward regime change, wars of aggression, bombing, even going as far as invading Iran. And what they're describing in this 2009 paper was the so-called Iran nuclear deal, which was eventually signed under the Obama administration. And they admit that the deal would be signed, the US would not honor it, they would just pretend to. They would blame its failure on Iran and then use that as a pretext for putting more pressure on Iran, which is literally what the Trump administration did afterwards. They unilaterally withdrew, blamed Iran for violating the deal. No evidence was ever presented or provided, and then they used that as a pretext to begin their maximum pressure policy, which was always the plan, no matter who won the election, whether it was President Trump or President Clinton, didn't matter. It was going to be maximum pressure. Continuing in the table of contents, disarming Tehran, the military option going all the way, invasion, the Asaraq option, airstrikes, leave it to Bibi, allowing or encouraging an Israeli military strike. And in here, they say, we will use Israel to attack Iran, and Israel will absorb all of the blame, all of the retaliation, and the US will get what it wants and keep its hands clean. Even if the US joins in after Israel attacks Iran, the US will still be able to keep its hands clean, at least in terms of shifting blame and retaliation. That was 2009, and that is literally what just happened last year. Verbatim, that is exactly what happened. And I've had people tell me, Brian, that's a 2009 policy paper. It's completely irrelevant. Don't you think anything has changed? Read the paper and look at what has happened, and you tell me if anything has changed. The answer is no, nothing has changed. The US pursues these policy objectives no matter who is in the White House and no matter who controls Congress. And the proof is right there in front of you in black and white. All of these options versus what has happened right before our very eyes over the last several years. Here, toppling Tehran, regime change, the Velvet Revolution. They're talking about color revolution. Supporting a popular uprising, but then again, you read the chapter and they admit all of these opposition groups the US is backing are completely unpopular. Okay, but they need to convince the public that they are popular. Inspiring an insurgency, supporting Iranian minority and opposition groups. And in that chapter, they talk about supporting U.S. State Department listed foreign terrorist organizations, including Mujahideen al-Khaliq, which killed, and they admit in the paper, they killed American civilians, they killed American military personnel. They're absolutely terrorists. Since then, they've killed other people in absolute unjustifiable terrorism, but they are a great proxy to use, and the US should remove them from the foreign terrorist organization list so that the US government could give them more public and broader support. And then a few years later, they literally delisted Mujahideen al-Khaliq, even though they're still absolute terrorists, and they're actually carrying out terrorism inside Iran. And then, of course, they have the coup supporting a military move against the regime. And what they admit is, yes, we're going to covertly support armed groups to carry out terrorism and violence inside Iran to overthrow the government, or at least tie up the governments, deplete their resources, and essentially a campaign of attrition where you're throwing all of these things at Iran until something cracks. And that is exactly what we just watched. So a 2009 paper describing verbatim what we just watched take place in Iran. The paper contains an entire chapter titled The Velvet Revolution, Supporting a Popular Uprising. I showed you that. And also Inspiring an Insurgency, Supporting Iranian Minority and Opposition Groups, as well as a chapter literally titled Leave It to Bibi, Allowing or Encouraging an Israeli Military Strike. And this is what they stated. This is a quote from the paper. The United States would encourage and perhaps even assist the Israelis in conducting the strikes themselves, in the expectation that both international criticism and Iranian retaliation would be deflected away from the United States and onto Israel, a scenario that would unfold verbatim mid last year. That is literally what happened last year. Regarding U.S. engineered unrest, the 2009 paper proposes using U.S. State Department listed foreign terrorist organizations, including the Mujahideen al-Khaliq, MEK. The paper admits is highly unpopular, very unpopular. I mean, they cannot stress enough how unpopular they are inside Iran, that they had killed American citizens and military personnel in the 1970s, and has most certainly carried out terrorism against others since, but that it would be removed from the US FTO list in order for the US to provide greater and more open support. And then in 2012, and look at this article, you know, if you don't read the policy papers and you don't think in the long term and see how this is all connected, and if you cannot ignore a Republican in office, the Democratic Party candidate in office, if you cannot see through this, you cannot see the continuity of agenda. But here, 2012, the 2009 paper says delist MEK. 2012, US removes Iran group MEK from terror list. All right, if you're actually reading the policy papers and following along year to year, and you ignore the political theater that is taking place that's meant to distract you from seeing continuity of agenda, you will see all of this, and you will see clearly years ahead of time what is going to happen before anyone else does. It's very simple to do. And so in 2012, MEK was delisted under the Obama administration after years of lobbying from neoconservatives who would later line President Donald Trump's first administration. So the Obama administration delisted them. Who was lobbying for them? These are the people who are lobbying for them. Giuliani, Bolton, Newt Gingrich, all of these people in this article, they spent years lobbying for MEK, who are terrorists and who had killed American civilians, civilian contractors in Iran, and also military personnel in Iran. And they were lobbying for them, and then all of these people were brought into the Trump administration during his first term. And now he has all the same type of people in his second administration, and some of these people had also lobbied for MEK as well. In regards to other groups now involved in unrest in Iran, because if you read the news reports carefully, you will see that it's not all Iranians rising up. It's specific ethnic and religious groups that are rising up. And this is what the 2009 Which Path to Persia paper said. The United States could opt to work primarily with various unhappy Iranian ethnic groups, Kurds, Baluch, Arabs, and so on, who have fought the regime at various periods since the revolution. A coalition of ethnic opposition movements, particularly if combined with dissident Persians, would pose a serious threat to regime stability. In addition, the unrest the groups themselves create could weaken the regime at home. And this is now precisely what is taking place inside Iran today. This is what has been taking place, this is what they have been working on, and this is what they continue doing. Despite preparations for both internal subversion and direct U.S. military strikes on Iran, spanning not only the Biden administrations, but going as far back as the Bush Jr. and Obama administrations, Iran has weathered these attempts for years and appears to have been at least partially prepared for the most recent round of U.S. engineered unrest. The above cited Forbes article, talking about tens of thousands of Starlink terminals operating inside Iran reported Iran successfully shut down not only the internet services US-backed militants were using to coordinate their actions, they also shut down the cellular phone network and communicate with their foreign sponsors, but also managed to extensively jam Starlink terminals in critical regions. The same article speculated that Iran's success may be owed to the transfer of Russian electronic warfare capabilities perfected in the US proxy war taking place in Ukraine, where Starlink has also been extensively used. So the US is using Starlink. It has been weaponized. It is used as a weapon of war and subversion and terrorism in Ukraine against Russia, and now in Iran against the Iranian society. And this is what the US has done with social media platforms based in the US. They have weaponized them. So let's talk about US weaponization of information space in the 21st century. And again, the fact that most countries, unfortunately, most countries are not taking this seriously is exactly what gives the US the ability to continue doing this. Throughout the 21st century, the US has deliberately and maliciously weaponized its dominion over global information space, specifically through US-based social media platforms like X, and they were doing it when it was Twitter, and now they continue doing it under X, Meta, Facebook, YouTube, Google, Instagram, and many others. And so there's this 2011 New York Times article, US groups helped nurture Arab uprising. April 2011, I warned people as the Arab Spring was taking place that all of the opposition groups leading the protests were all backed by the US through the National Endowment for Democracy, USAID, and all of these other ways the US funds these groups, trains them, and equips them. They were doing it years in advance. The Arab Spring was not spontaneous. It was engineered by the US. This article admits all of the things that I was warning people about. This New York Times article came out a couple of months later and just admitted all of it. And so in this article, US groups helped nurture Arab uprising. It would admit a number of the groups and individuals directly involved in the revolts and reforms sweeping the region received training and financing from groups like the International Republican Institute, the National Democratic Institute, and Freedom House. And these are all subsidiaries of the National Endowment for Democracy. And the NED is still being funded and still operating all around the globe to this day, despite whatever the Trump administration tried to convince people about defunding it and dismantling it. You could just go to their website, ned.org, and you can see they're still operating right now. And all of this was exposed by American diplomatic cables obtained by WikiLeaks. So thank WikiLeaks again for exposing this. A lot of people would have no idea this was going on without WikiLeaks. And Julian Assange and the sacrifices that he has made to bring this information to light. The article also admitted that a number of the opposition groups involved attended this is a direct quote from the New York Times article, a 2008 technology meeting in New York where they were taught to use social networking and mobile technologies to promote democracy. Among those sponsoring the meeting were Facebook, Google, MTV, Columbia Law School, and the US State Department. I showed these youth movements organized events, and they took place every year. It wasn't just 2008. They were taking every year for years, and they were preparing all of these groups to go back to their respective nations to divide, destroy them, overthrow the government of them.
I want to congratulate all of you who have come to Mexico City in person and online to be part of this groundbreaking summit. You are the vanguard of a rising generation of citizen activists who are using the latest technological tools to catalyze change, build movements, and transform lives. And I hope this conference provides an opportunity for you to learn from each other and discover the tools and techniques that will open new doors for activism and empowerment when you return home. All over the world, young people like you are driving progress. You have all traveled unique paths to get here today. You come from different cultures and countries and speak different languages, but you all share a common commitment to engaging with the world, to using every tool at your disposal to bring people together to solve problems. And that makes you the kind of leaders we need as we work to meet the challenges and seize the opportunities of the 21st century. Governments can't do it alone. Citizens, organizations, businesses, universities, everyone with a stake in our shared future must take responsibility for shaping it. That's what we call 21st century statecraft. So thank you for being on the front lines of progress, and I can't wait to see what all of you do next.
In fact, this technology meeting was held annually for several years and built on the experience the US government obtained from similar political interference aimed at nations like Serbia, Georgia, Belarus, and Ukraine between 2000 and 2004. And I've pointed this article out many, many times. U.S. campaign behind the turmoil in Kiev. This was when there were U.S.-backed protests in Ukraine in 2004, the first attempt to overthrow the Ukrainian government and transform Ukraine into an armed battering ram against Russia. The campaign is an American creation, a sophisticated and brilliantly conceived exercise in Western branding and mass marketing, and that's all U.S. Western-style democracy is. It is branding and mass marketing. It's whoever has the most money and the most influence online, they win. People, I'm sorry, people don't have agency. 90%, and I'm being generous, 90% of the population has no agency. They believe whatever they're told. Whatever the TV tells them, whatever is repeated most often, that is what they will believe in. That is the unfortunate truth. And the US and the West in general takes full advantage of that. And if you are a nation and your information space is set up in such a way where the West is allowed to say whatever it wants, uncontested in your information space, and is able to, because it has more money and more control over the social media platforms everybody is using, to repeat it and have it seen and heard by everyone more than your message, no matter how true it is, they will believe whatever it is the US is saying. And they will disbelieve what you are saying, and they will even oppose what you are saying, even if it is 100% the truth. And that is the unfortunate truth about people, agency, and so-called democracy. The Guardian in 2004 would admit the ongoing protests, so I already said, an American creation, that in 4 years, in four countries in 4 years has been used to try to salvage rigged elections and topple unsavory regimes. And all that means is elections that don't turn out the way the US wants them to, and governments that don't do what the US tells them to do. It also admitted, the Guardian article also admitted, the campaign was first used in Europe in Belgrade in 2000 to beat Slobodan Milosevic at the ballot box. Richard Miles, the US ambassador in Belgrade, played a key role. So you have Americans playing a key role in the elections of other countries. They're admitting this. And by last year, as US ambassador in Tbilisi, he repeated the trick in Georgia. So he was the one coaching Mikhail Saakashvili how to seize power in Georgia and then turn Georgia into a battering ram against Russia, culminating in the 2008 Russia-Georgia war, where Georgia completely lost and people died. And Georgia was a mess, and they've had to fight very, very hard to get their sovereignty back. And I think the jury is still out on whether they've fully succeeded or not. And then they talk about 10 months after the success in Belgrade, U.S. ambassador in Minsk, Michael Kozak, a veteran of similar operations in Central America, notably Nicaragua, organized a near-identical campaign to try to defeat the Belarus hardman Alexander Lukashenko, which the article admitted failed. Thus, from 2000 to 2004, the U.S. attempted serial overthrows of targeted governments across Eastern Europe. In 2011, the U.S. refined these techniques to burn to the ground much of the Arab world. Remember, the Arab Spring began, and everybody was saying it's spontaneous. It's an anti-U.S., anti-Israel uprising. That's what a lot of people were literally saying. Even as I was pointing out, all the groups involved were funded by the U.S. government. And then it transformed into armed violence, terrorism, and then the U.S. used that violence as a pretext to strike at and overthrow the government of Libya, invade, occupy, and now completely collapse Syria. And they've also been waging war on Yemen this entire time. So that was the Arab Spring, then successfully overthrew and plunged the nation of Ukraine into destruction by proxy war from 2014 onward, while last year, the US government overthrew the government of Nepal on China's borders and is now openly attempting to use these same tactics coupled with the threat of overt military aggression to topple the Iranian government. While analysts have documented the growing disparity between US and both Russian and Chinese military industrial power, including me, I've documented that. The US has retained almost uncontested dominance over the global information space. Looking at the swath of destabilization, death, and destruction the US has cut from North Africa to Asia and everywhere in between throughout the 21st century, it has more than compensated for its lack of military-industrial production. The US information dominance has proven as much, if not more, of a threat to the world than America's still formidable military menace. It does not even need to use its military to overthrow targeted governments. Did not use its military in Nepal to overthrow the government and put any defunded opposition leaders into the interim government. They did not need to use the military. That is how powerful American control over information space in other nations is, and how influential it is, and how much damage it can do. Again, hundreds of people killed in Nepal during this US organized overthrow of its government. Let's talk about the US threat to global information space and how it requires global defense. The nations of Russia and China have, over the course of many years and through extensive work, they did not do this overnight, secured their respective information space. This has, in turn, allowed both nations to secure and stabilize their political space, providing the social harmony required to not only survive ongoing attempts by the US to encircle and contain both global powers, but in many instances to thrive. China is thriving despite US efforts to contain, divide, and destroy it. This has been achieved through the creation of domestic alternatives to US-based social media platforms that otherwise dominate global information space. Both nations have online networks that can be disconnected from Western-influenced information space when and if necessary, to whatever degree they feel is necessary. Beyond this, both nations have created domestic pipelines, ensuring crucial human resources such as programmers and technicians required to maintain the physical infrastructure of their information space are trained in country and with the nation's best interests in mind, as well as the media personnel, government officials, and other civil servants who use each nation's information space. In other words, say here in Thailand, where do people go to learn about journalism? If you want to be a journalist or you want to join the Thai Ministry of Foreign Affairs, where do you go to get your education? You go to America, to Europe, or you go to a Thai university that's full of Western professors promoting Western interests over at the expense of Thailand's interests. You get your degree and then you go work for media here in Thailand. You could even go work for the Thai government itself, and your mindset has been tilted in favor of Western interests at the expense of your own nation's sovereignty, which is why people say, why don't they just pass an NGO law? Why don't they just work with China or with Russia to create their own alternatives to US-based social media platforms? Because these people, these human resources, have been influenced and in a way captured by Western interests, because their whole education was in a Western system, either abroad or even here inside of Thailand. And Thailand isn't the exception. Most countries have this problem. China and Russia solved this by having their own pipeline. They said, if we're going to have journalists working here in China, they should be educated in China with Chinese interests in mind. When they report the news to the rest of China or to the world, they're doing it from a Chinese perspective, not from Wall Street and Washington's perspective, and reflecting their interests. This is not unlike the physical infrastructure built within any sovereign nation. Roads, rail, airports, and seaports are all acknowledged to be integral to national security, and thus their construction, maintenance, use, and protection are determined accordingly. So you have roads. You don't hire American security contractors to secure and police your roads. You do it yourself, because it's crucial to national security that you have control over those roads and how they are used. Common sense, and that common sense should extend to the information space of a nation, but for some reason it just doesn't. It just doesn't. No one seems to get this yet. Unfortunately, many policymakers across the planet have yet to understand that information space in the 21st century is as important, if not more so, than the physical infrastructure of traditional national security domains. I would say more so because even if you have fully protected all of your physical national security domains, if the US is able to take over and control your information space, they can negate all of the other advantages that you work so hard to build. allowing the US to not only provide US-based social media platforms to nations, rather than nations developing their own, but allowing the US to also control the flow of information and thus ideas and consensus on these platforms is as bad or worse than allowing foreign interests to control a nation's physical borders, infrastructure, and even a nation's own citizenry, because control over information space is control over the citizenry. The cost of surrendering a key, if not the key domain of national security to the United States is political infiltration, capture, and even complete collapse, as admitted US operations spanning the 21st century from Europe to the Arab world to Asia and back, again, have sufficiently demonstrated. Look at what the US has done to Eastern Europe. Look what it did to the Arab world. Look what it just did to Iran. I, myself, have documented US infiltration and attempted political capture here in Southeast Asia. The damage that it does, the real lives that it ends, that it destroys and ends, that is the cost of not defending your information space. While the multipolar world joins to discuss cooperation across the traditional spheres of national security, urgent attention to securing of the globe's information space from US influence and control is urgently required. Russia and China, which export weapons to help partner nations defend their traditional domains of national security, could export turnkey domestic alternatives to US social media platforms, physical infrastructure and gateways, as well as electronic warfare equipment to defend against the sort of interference the US just executed across Iran information space, as well as opportunities to link all of these domestic social platforms to multipolar alternatives to US-based X, YouTube, Facebook, and other platforms. So again, right now, I have to share my videos on YouTube. There is no multipolar alternative to YouTube, and YouTube is connected in with Wall Street and Washington, and whatever they say to prioritize, they do. And whatever they say, bury it deep in the algorithm, they do. And so again, sometimes I feel like Russia and China think, well, we have a more appealing message, so people will hear it and buy it. It's not true, especially if people never hear it to begin with. You need multipolar alternatives globally and locally. Iran, a nation with significant conventional military power, has been undermined and weakened because of its delay in securing its information space and thus political space sufficiently from foreign interference. And while it has acted decisively in recent weeks and appears to have prepared at least months in advance, only time will tell if it is just in time or still too late. People are acting as if this is all already done. Iran succeeded and they're out of the woods. They're not. They're not. They're going to continue to suffer until they get serious about securing all of their national security domains, especially information space, as serious as, say, China or Russia, and unifying and reorganizing their political space to stop aping Western-style democracy, which is a system of control, not a system of self-determination, and a system of control you are allowing other nations to use to control you, not to control your own population. Until they make this transformation, they will continue to be at risk. The future of the multipolar world may depend not on how large the disparity is between it and the US hegemony in terms of traditional military power, but how quickly the rest of the world realizes the importance of controlling information space the US has understood and exploited across the entirety of the 21st century. The US has understood this, and they have fully exploited it for this entire 21st century. And very few nations are waking up and acting accordingly. So many others are ignoring this problem, as if they ignore it, it'll go away. Or if they just come up with an appealing enough message, they can persuade people online as if they're unaware that there are algorithms US-based social media platforms use to bury information they don't want people to see and to promote messages, information, a consensus that they want to promote. You cannot fight that within their system. You have to replace their system, displace it from your information space, replace it with your own system, and then you can have whatever debate you want in your information space. You get to determine that, not Washington, not Wall Street, not Silicon Valley. So until people get this, the threat will persist, and all of the consequences this threat, ignoring this threat create, we will continue to all collectively suffer them. And people say, oh, it's in Iran, who cares? Every time the US is successful anywhere on earth, it makes the likelihood of them succeeding anywhere else that much more likely, including wherever it is you live and you think somehow is immune to this. They will eventually get you, is inevitable if this isn't stopped. So that is the article, that is the video. I've talked about this endlessly for years. I will continue talking about it endlessly until it's addressed and until this threat no longer exists. If you thought this video was useful, please like and share. Think about subscribing. It's free to do. It helps the channel grow. Check the video description below for other places you can find and follow my work. Again, you go to the video description. It says more. You click on more. These are all the links that I referenced. Here are all the places you can find my work. And I do not monetize any of my social media platforms. None of them. If ads pop up, feel free to skip them. They're not helping me out at all. If you do want to help support my work, you can do it through Buy Me a Coffee and through Patreon. Those links will be in the video description below. To everyone who has been helping out, whether it's a one-time donation, donations month to month, or if you have no resources to spare at all and you're just helping by sharing, liking, posting kind comments, sending news tips, all of this is greatly appreciated. All of this together is what makes this work possible. I thank you sincerely, and as always, I thank you for watching.